Welcome to Cory's Conscious Living. Are you ready to meditate with Cory? Are you ready to lay down and be still and quiet? As quiet as a mouse and as still as a statue? Close your eyes if you want to while you listen to the story, or you can lay with your eyes open until you start to get sleepy and tired. Ramona and her stuffed dog, Mutsie, had made a fairy house. It was a fairy house in a fairy garden at the bottom of her garden, and it was the nicest, most prettiest, most beautifulest fairy house she'd made up to date. She'd spent a very long time collecting twigs and sticks and leaves and all the perfect things that would go together to make the most perfect fairy house. She looked down at Mutsie and said, "Do you think it would be the most amazing adventure if we could go in that house? Can you imagine if we got small enough, as small as the tiniest little fairies, and we went inside of the house? What an adventure that would be, Mutsie." She closed her eyes and thought about doing all the things that you would do to make a magical wish come true. She wiggled her nose, she twitched her ears, she said abracadabra, she waved a stick and pretended it was like a magical wand. And she opened her eyes, and she wasn't inside of the fairy house. She was just as big as she normally was, and Mutsie looked just the same. And then, all of a sudden, Mutsie coughed and did this funny dog sneeze. And that's all it took. They were inside the fairy house. "Mutsie," said Ramona, "it worked. We're here inside of a house." Wow. Inside of the house was a tiny little table that she'd made. But on this table, there was a note. She didn't remember making a note. She looked at Mutsie and said, "Did you make a note?" Mutsie shook his head. He didn't make a note. She walked over to the table, picked up the note, and the note said, "I understand that you would like to grow wings, and Mutsie would like to be a wolf. Is this true?" Ramona looked at Mutsie and Mutsie looked at Ramona, and they both nodded. It was true. Ramona carried on reading. "Well, you have to find 3 things, 3 clues. You have to go on an adventure. Go out of the back door and find these 3 things." Ramona's eyes got really big and she started to get very excited. Mutsie wagged his tail. He was panting and very excited too. She read the 3 things. "The first thing we have to find, it says here," said Ramona, "is the I believe stone." "How on earth are we supposed to find a stone?" she said as they were walking towards the back door of the fairy house. When she opened the back door, it opened up into a big, wide, beautiful-looking forest. There seemed to be hundreds and hundreds of trees, all different shades of green. The floor felt damp underneath her feet, and she could smell the forest. It smelled clean and fresh like leaves and pine and all sorts of good things. She looked around and then looked back at the note and carried on reading. It said, to find the I believe stone, you have to find a stone that's big enough to sit on and shaped just like a toadstool. Okay, said Ramona, that's a little bit better. We might have a chance of finding this stone, she said to Mutsie. They started to walk through the forest, looking all over the place. There was a path that they were following that seemed to be the way to go, but really they had absolutely no idea. They kept walking down the path, and then Ramona spotted something that looked red out of the corner of her left eye. She said to Mutsie, I think maybe this is it. Let's go over this way. They walked over to what appeared to be a big red giant stone that looked just like a toadstool. This is it, she said. This has to be it, Mutsie. I bet this is the one. All right, hold my hand. Let's climb up and sit on the stone, on the I believe stone, and let's find out what we're supposed to do. She grabbed hold of Mutsie's paw and got on the stone, and they sat there. All of a sudden, she felt this tingling sensation through her entire body. The tingling sensation started at her toes and went all the way up to the top of her head. It felt like it was bursting out of the top of her head like a rainbow. And then she looked at Mutsie, and Mutsie had his eyes closed, and it looked like he was tingling and vibrating everywhere too. And then she felt it. She felt the clue inside of her mind, inside of her body, and she said to Mutsie, I get it. We have to believe in ourselves. This is the I believe stone, and do you feel like you believe in yourself, Mutsie? Mutsie nodded his head up and down. He did. I feel like I believe in myself, said Ramona. All the tingling sensations seem to have woke something magical up inside of me that makes me feel like I believe in myself. You too? She looked at Mutsie. Mutsie nodded his head once again. Okay, I think we got it. Let's look at the next clue. Ramona read the next clue. It said, you have to find the anything is possible tree. The tree you will see because it stands alone with a star carved in its bark. Okay, said Ramona. Let's look for the tree, Mutsie. It's a tree that stands all on its own and it has a star carved in its bark. Are we ready? Let's go. She grabbed his paw and off they went. Once again, journeying down the path through the forest. It seemed that all of the trees had other trees directly around them or next to them. It was like none of the trees in the forest were really standing alone until she saw a tree that seemed to just be the only tree in the entire forest that had the sun shining down on it. It was like a beam of light coming from the sky, shining down on this one tree. She looked at Mutsie. I bet that's it, Mutsie. Let's go and explore. Let's go and see if that's our tree. Let's go and see if that's the anything is possible tree. They ran over to the tree, and sure enough, it had a big, giant star carved in its bark. I wonder what we have to do, said Ramona. Mutsie just automatically sat down on the ground and leant his back against the tree and closed his eyes. Ramona thought that looked like something that would possibly work. Who knows? So she sat down on the ground, leant up against the tree, closed her eyes, and sure enough, she got the tingling sensations traveling up from her toes, all the way through her body, all the way to the top of her head, and then poof, it felt like they were firing out of her head once again like a rainbow. Her whole body was tingling and vibrating, and she opened her eyes and looked down at Mutsie, and Mutsie was tingling and vibrating too. Do you feel like anything's possible, Mutsie? Mutsie looked up at her and nodded his head. He did. I feel like anything's possible too, she said. I wonder if that's what the anything is possible tree is supposed to make us feel like. 'Cause I surely feel right now that anything is possible. I think that's all we needed to know. Let's look at the next clue. She got out the piece of paper and read the next clue. The next clue said, find the open gate. The open gate represents your open mind. She looked down at Mutsie. Ooh, okay. It looks like we have to look for an open gate, Mutsie. An open gate that lets us know that we have an open mind. I think that means we're supposed to feel like anything is possible. Just like the tree thinks. Okay, let's do it. So she stood up and she grabbed hold of Mutsie's paw. They once again got back on the path and started to look for a gate. Where would a gate be in a forest, she thought. It didn't actually take too long before they came upon a gate. Just a simple gate that was wide open. It had gate posts on either side of it, but no fence. Nothing to stop you from going around the gate or through the gate or in the gate or over the gate. But it was just a gate, an open gate. I think this is the gate, said Ramona. She grabbed hold of Mutsie's paw and they started to walk through the gate. And as soon as they walked through the gate, it was like the whole world around them changed. All the colours of the forest changed. The sky got brighter. The trees got greener. The birds were singing louder. Everything was more real, more beautiful, more perfect, she thought as she looked around. And then she realized that she was in a place where her mind had been completely opened. She had the thought, how do you know if your mind is open? But then her toes started to tingle, her body started to vibrate, and she got vibrations and tingles going all the way up to her head, spurting out of the top of her head like a rainbow, just like the other two times. She looked down at Mutsie, and Mutsie was tingling and vibrating all over too. She said, Mutsie, do you feel like you have an open mind? Mutsie nodded his head. I feel like I have an open mind too. Actually, she said, my back feels a little bit tickly. It feels like it's itching. She reached over with one of her hands and scratched her back and felt the darndest thing. She felt a tiny little feather. She reached over with the other hand and felt the other side of her back. Another little feather. Mutsie, she said, do I have feathers on my back? Mutsie looked at Ramona's back and nodded. She did. And then all of a sudden, Mutsie started to howl. Ooh! And she watched his little face, and his little face started to turn into a wolf face. Ooh! And then she felt her back once again, and her tiny little feathers had grown. She had wings. Mutsie, she said, do I have wings? Mutsie, now a wolf, howling at the moon, nodded. She had wings. She moved her shoulders and started to flap her wings. She did. She had wings, big, white, feathery wings that looked perfect. and they were really, really, really big, like the biggest wings that she would ever have seen on anybody. She started to flap them really strongly, and they made like a whoosh, whoosh, whoosh sound. Once again, Mutsie howled at the moon. Moo! She looked down at Mutsie and said, I think our wishes came true. I think because we found the I believe stone, and then we found the anything is possible tree, and then we went through the open gate, meaning that we have an open mind, those three things combined have made it so that we get what we wanted. Mutsie, I have wings. Mutsie, you're a wolf. Mutsie had the biggest smile on his face. Woo, woo, woo. He howled at the moon like the biggest wolf. Woo, woo, woo. And in sheer joy, she started to flap her wings, and her little feet come off the ground, off the forest floor, and she lifted up and started to fly up. She shouted down, Mutsie, look, I'm flying! She started flying higher and higher, up above the trees, up above all of the buildings around in the town. She started to fly higher and higher up towards the moon. She looked down, and Mutsie was getting smaller and smaller and smaller as she flew higher and higher and higher. And then all of a sudden, Mutsie sneezed and coughed, and she was sat on the ground in her garden, staring at Mutsie, staring at the fairy house, as if none of it had ever happened. Her eyes got very, very big. Was it real? She thought. She looked at Mutsie. Mutsie, was that real? And Mutsie nodded his head as if to say yes, it was. Ramona said, Do you mean to say that I really do have wings? And you are really a wolf? Mutsie nodded his head. How cool is that?